For today's video, I have finally gotten my hands at home on the 2020 Silverado 1500 with the 3-liter diesel engine under the hood. This particular model is the RST trim, which I also think is the better looking version of the Silverado currently. When this generation of the Silverado first launched, a lot of folks thought that the look was, shall we say, controversial. But I think that the RST solves most of those problems, at least for me. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section. Instead of a massive amount of chrome, we have a lot of body-colored components going on here, and then black inserts in between. But we still have a metal bumper right down here at the bottom. It's just no longer chrome. It is now that body color matching portion. But the shapes are essentially the same up here. We still have this full LED headlamp module, and then a light strip that swirls around and meets the turn signal down there below, intersected by all of this body colored portion there. And then we still have these functional vents down lower on the front end. These are designed to help improve overall aerodynamics. They release pressure up front and then they guide it back here towards the wheel well. Aerodynamics is definitely important in a pickup truck because these things are shaped like a brick, and this is one of the most fuel efficient pickup trucks you can buy in America. This gets on average 1 mile per gallon better than the Ram EcoDiesel we recently tested. A nice touch up front is where they've located the engine block heater connections. So rather than having a cord dangling out from underneath the hood like we found in cars in the 80s, we have a very simple plug right there next to the fog light. Of course, most folks that live out in temperate climates won't have any idea what to do with this plug, but if you are in the middle of a Minnesota winter and it's several degrees below zero, 20, 30, 40, 50 degrees below zero, this is going to be an important way of making sure your diesel truck starts. According to Chevy, Ford, and Ram, most people are looking at a small diesel engine in their half-ton truck for improved fuel economy and, of course, improved towing performance as well. The two things that we're going to focus on in this video. If you want to know about the interior of the Silverado for 2020, or of course the closely related GMC Sierra, I have additional videos on the channel. You should check those out. But suffice it to say, for 2020, there have been no major changes on the inside. So I still think that the interior falls a step behind the Ram 1500, and in some key areas, even a little bit behind the Ford F-150. But of course, as I've said previously, that applies mainly to the top-end trims. If we're talking about mid-level trims, they're not necessarily too far off. Although in this RST truck, I still find the comparably priced Ram 1500 a little bit nicer place to spend your time. The model that we're driving is a double-cab, 2-wheel drive model. Unfortunately, I was not able to get the 4-wheel drive version of the Silverado. The 4-wheel drive version is the one that has the max tow ability of over 9,000 pounds of towing. This particular model comes in at 7,600 pounds. That is definitely below the last Ram 1500 that we tested, and as a result, we're going to have to adjust the tow load right behind. This is a 3,500 pound flatbed trailer, and we're going to put an old Jeep Grand Cherokee on it to bring this up to just under 8,000 pounds. That is going to be a few hundred pounds over the theoretical tow rating of this particular vehicle, but going about 200 pounds over or so is not really going to be too much of a problem, and that's going to put this a little bit closer to what we were last towing behind the Ram 1500. Last time we looked at the Silverado, a lot of folks were asking, why is the tow rating in the diesel a little bit below what we find in the competitive trucks? The main reason for that is that General Motors has focused on fuel efficiency rather than towing ability. And let's dive under the hood and talk about that now. Power figures are more or less comparable to the Ram pickup truck. We have a little bit more horsepower and a little bit less torque at 277 horsepower and 460 pound-feet of torque. But the interesting thing about this engine, and really the Silverado lineup in general, is that this is the only pickup truck in America that has an engine lineup that was designed for trucks from the ground up and really is used exclusively in pickup trucks at this time. Ram's V6 and V8 engines were designed to do double duty under the hoods of their passenger cars and their pickup truck line, and the 3-liter turbo diesel that they're using in the Ram 1500 EcoDiesel was, interestingly enough, originally designed for Cadillac. Very similar things are going on at Ford, where we have a host of different turbo engines that were designed for use in passenger cars, in front-wheel drive and rear-wheel drive applications, and of course, their diesel engine comes from Jaguar Land Rover. But things are quite different in the Silverado, from the 4-cylinder gasoline-powered turbocharged engine to this brand new inline-6 turbo diesel. Everything was designed for truck duty right up front, and that really shows with this engine. This is the only one available with an exhaust brake. Now, this is not as aggressive, not as brakey, basically, as the big turbo diesels that we find in the 3/4-ton and 1-ton trucks, but it still makes a difference out on the road. And you will notice the difference between this and the 3-liter EcoDiesel in the Ram. This is also an inline-6 engine design, so it's going to be a little bit smoother, and it's going to sound more like, interestingly enough, the Cummins turbo diesel that we find in the Ram 3/4-ton and 1-ton trucks. But of course, the big thing is fuel economy, and this particular model is rated for 27 miles per gallon combined. That's 1 mile per gallon better than we find in the Ram 1500, making this one of the most efficient half-ton trucks you can buy in America. And there we have it, everybody's strapped down now. Theoretically, again, this is just slightly over the overall tow rating of this Silverado, but I don't think that's too much of a problem. We're only about 200 pounds over. We're talking about nearly 8,000 pounds of towing ability. That's not really a big deal. But again, to try and be as fair as possible, I'm trying to get the overall trailer weight a little bit closer to what we did for the Ram 1500 Diesel Challenge. Rather unfortunately, this truck does not have the complete suite of GM's excellent trailering features, but you can see one of them being demonstrated right now. There's nobody in the truck, but you can see that the lights are on. We have the turn signals, the brake lights flashing in order. That allows you to check the lights on your trailer yourself without having someone else there. And you can also do that through the My GM app that will communicate through the vehicle's Bluetooth connection. Although it does require a bunch of additional setup, GM also offers their invisible trailer setup. You'll find that on a separate video on our channel as well. That's one of the best trailering features I think available in this particular segment. Even without that extra option, however, you can see that the camera is a very high resolution camera and we have absolutely excellent contrast going on here. This is definitely better than what we find, for instance, in the Nissan Titan. You can turn the lines on and off. There's a center line that you can turn on solo. Oops, that's a little bit difficult to tell, but you can see it's right there in the middle. And then, of course, we can engage the hitch view, which takes a top-down look, makes it very, very easy to align the trailer ball right there on your hitch. Again, much higher resolution than we find in some of the competition, but pretty similar to what we see in the Ram 1500 and the Ford F-150. Definitely better than we find in the Toyota and the Nissan competition, however. And then things go to the next level with the additional camera packages that are available on the Silverado. We have a bunch of different camera views, from side camera views to the invisible trailer view, etc. There's a separate video on that on my channel, but I will say that one thing I noticed that has not been rectified is that for some reason, even though there is a camera option for the rear view mirror, you can't put the invisible trailer camera on that rear view mirror. Let's start out on the road by talking about towing first. I again have just under 8,000 pounds connected right there. We have our integrated trailer brake controller dialed in. I like the way that this trailer brake controller is integrated into the system. And of course, we have the vehicle in tow mode as far as the transmission setting goes. The first thing you're going to notice out on the road is that this diesel's pretty peppy. Unladen, this went 0 to 60 in 7 seconds, which is a pretty decent score for a half-ton pickup truck, whether we're talking about a diesel engine like this or really most of the mainstream V8 options. Now, obviously, the 6.2-liter V8 in Chevy's lineup is going to get you 0 to 60 an awful lot faster than this, but this is definitely going to be faster than the 2.7-liter turbo, the 4.3-liter V6, and in our testing, also than the last 5.3-liter V8 that we drove. And thanks to the massive amount of torque we get out of this engine, it doesn't feel like it's struggling at all as we're climbing this hill here. We're still hanging out at around 2,000 RPM. And of course, there are some steeper slopes coming up here in a short while. If you're in stop-and-go traffic, or if you're just coming to a complete stop and then starting again, especially on hills, you will notice the less aggressive final drive ratio in this vehicle. So for instance, if we're on this slope right here and I came to a complete stop, then obviously this transmission is really going to be relying on the torque converter a little bit more. You can see we get a little bit of wheel slip there. Obviously, this is the two-wheel drive truck, but overall performance is definitely acceptable, and I really love the combination of this diesel engine and this 10-speed automatic transmission. This is part of the General Motors Ford Transmission Alliance. We see essentially the same transmission under the hood of the F-150, and this has great gear ratios. It's very, very well suited to a diesel engine. Thanks to higher redlines, this engine redlines just under 5,000 RPM and a very broad torque curve. We also have higher horsepower ratings than a 3-liter diesel would have had 10-15 years ago. That, coupled with the 10-speed automatic transmission, means that this has a really nice feel to it, whether you're talking about towing or not. And when I first brought this truck home and drove a few people around in it, they were surprised that it was a diesel engine because they didn't really think that it sounded like a diesel or felt like a diesel out on the road. Completely unladen in our 60 to 0 braking test, it took 131 feet for this vehicle to stop from 60 miles an hour. That's pretty average overall for a half-ton truck. While we're out on this winding road, we should talk about handling and ride quality. GM has tweaked the suspension for 2020. I was actually surprised about that because they really pretty strongly defended the tuning of the 2019 model year vehicle, but I found that version just a little bit too stiff, a little bit too unresponsive in some situations. They have definitely improved the 2020 model year vehicle, but I still think that the handling and overall ride quality winner is going to be the Ram 1500. And if you want the best ride in this segment, that's going to be the Ram 1500 with the optional air suspension. In terms of overall comparisons, I think overall ride quality is pretty comparable to the Ford F-150, and that puts this a notch above what we see in the Titan or the Tundra. Thanks to its truck-focused design, this GM inline-6 diesel engine does have an exhaust brake. However, it's not as effective as the exhaust brakes that we find in the big diesels from GM. It is, however, doing a better job of keeping our speed in check on this downhill slope than the Ram 1500 EcoDiesel was, where I was really digging an awful lot into the brakes. So this is definitely going to save your brakes if you live in the mountains versus that EcoDiesel, but it's not going to give you 3500 or 2500 style engine braking. I have to admit that I'm a little bit disappointed in the engine braking ability of this inline six. I had hoped that it would be that next level of engine braking performance, but I also have to admit that I think my expectations were perhaps just a little unrealistic for what you could do with a 3-liter small diesel engine. Again though, however, this is still a very good design, and we haven't gone over about 55 miles an hour. We have sped a little bit in some of these longer downhill straights, had to keep it in check a little bit with the brakes on the vehicle and of course on the trailer, but it seems like we've settled into a happy medium of about 52 to 53 miles an hour here. But again, on these longer downhill runs, this is definitely a better performance than we find in the Ram 1500 or the Ford F-150 with their small diesel engines. Now that we've turned around and we're climbing this hill again, you'll really notice the amount of torque we get out of this inline six diesel. We're going 50 miles an hour up this grade, engine's loafing at just over 2,000 RPM. The engine is not struggling at all, and the transmission's not really even changing gears. We have a lot of gears to choose from, so there's always going to be a gear ratio that's about right for this 40 to 50 mile an hour hill climb that most folks find themselves in. If you're looking for a pickup truck with a quiet diesel engine that just purrs along under the hood, you will find that in the Ford and in the Ram. But if you want something that honestly sounds like a baby Cummins turbo diesel in some ways, then that's definitely going to be this engine right here. And I have to admit that I like the way diesel engines sound, so personally I don't have a problem with this cabin noise score at all. We got 72 decibels at 50 miles an hour in this engine, but as the engine's working harder going up this hill at 50 miles an hour, that went up to 74 decibels, so pretty decent difference overall. But again, I actually find this engine sound pleasing. Now let's talk about long distance trip fuel economy. We did a 200-mile round trip loop in this truck, same drive loop that we did in the Ram 1500 Eco Diesel, and this truck really surprised me, getting 29.5 miles per gallon. The cruise control was set to 72 miles an hour the entire time, and we went up and over 3 mountain passes, the tallest one 2,200 feet. So that's a very, very good fuel economy number, and that was actually 2 miles per gallon better than we got in the Ram 1500 Eco Diesel. And the 1500 Eco Diesel also outperformed its overall fuel economy score. Whether you're looking for a truck with just a large amount of range for long distance driving, or you're looking for a truck with excellent fuel economy because you want to save on gasoline or diesel, this is going to be an excellent option. If you're a shopper that has, say, a 20 or 25-year-old diesel 3/4 ton truck, and you're debating, do I need a 3/4 ton truck anymore? Could I get away with a half-ton truck? I have to say that driving with 8,000 pounds on the back of this versus something like a 1999 or 2000 Ram 2500 with the Cummins diesel, I would much rather be driving this truck. Having all these gears to choose from, a much broader RPM band, and of course a much more modern diesel engine design just makes this a better tow vehicle all the way around. Bottom lining, the 3-liter Duramax diesel that we find in the Chevy Silverado and of course the GMC Sierra is pretty easy for me. This is hands down the best diesel engine available in a half-ton truck right now. And I'm really excited that we're not just going to find it in trucks in GM's lineup. We will also find it in their full-size SUVs, from the Yukon and the Tahoe to the Suburban and the Escalade as well. In our long-distance drive, we got nearly 30 miles per gallon, and if you can keep your highway speeds in check and the freeway is perfectly level, then you will be getting over 30 miles per gallon in this truck especially. But while we're talking about that, I have to say that this truck right here doesn't really make sense to me. We get such a massive amount of torque out of this turbo diesel engine that the 2-wheel drive model really is overwhelmed quite easily by it, and that was really obvious when towing out on gravel surfaces like I am on right here. In fact, this had troubles getting up and out of my driveway, and this is not a terribly sloped area, but with 8,000 pounds approximately on the back and just 2-wheel drive, it was scrabbling for traction. So I would absolutely buy the Silverado with 4-wheel drive and give up 1 mile per gallon for that improved traction. That was also really obvious out on steeper paved areas where I came to a complete stop to just see what it was like, and there was an awful lot of tire spinning going on in the back. And of course, coming up to this area here, there is a relatively steep asphalt section that this also had some traction issues with. But aside from that, this diesel is obviously my favorite. I have to admit, my only complaint about GM's pickup truck lineup at the moment is the interior. It definitely feels left behind. It feels very much like the last generation of the Silverado and Sierra. It's styled very much like them as well. And now it's time for the final number. In our round trip towing test, we averaged 13.2 miles per gallon. Now that may not sound terribly exciting, but remember, we're talking about a half-ton truck with 8,000 pounds behind it going up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass. That is a really good number, honestly, for a half-ton truck. This beats the Ram 1500 Eco Diesel in real-world fuel economy driving, and it is at least 50% more efficient than a comparable gasoline engine inside GM's lineup. You could logically compare this towing-wise to something like the 6.2-liter V8. This definitely has more torque than their 5.3, but either of those engines is going to be giving you significantly lower fuel economy when towing heavy loads, or really generally towing any loads at all, versus this EcoDiesel here. So if you're the kind of person that constantly has a trailer connected to your truck, this is the engine that I would buy. Now, would I buy this over the 6.2? Would I buy it over a Ram 5.7-liter engine? Would I buy it over a Ford F-150 3.5-liter twin turbo? Well, Ford's twin turbo engines are relatively efficient. They're an awful lot of fun, but long distance towing isn't exactly their forte. Overall fuel economy will definitely fall well below this engine right here. Again, I would buy this over the Ford and the FCA diesel engines at the moment, and I have to admit that interior aside, I would buy this over Ram's 5.7 or Chevy's own 6.2-liter V8. But does that make this my half-ton top pick in America right now? I wouldn't go quite that far. If I were looking at a GM pickup truck, I have to admit I would buy the Sierra because I think the front-end design is a little bit more attractive. And I also have to admit that if I were truck shopping right now, I would probably put my money down on a Ram 1500 with the 5.7 engine, mainly because of the interior refinement and the ride quality. But again, if you're the kind of person that has a trailer connected to their truck all the time, then that might push this just over the edge. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comments section below, and would you be interested in a small diesel engine in your next half-ton truck? I'll see all of you later.